Introduce Toby Thorne, also from the Toronto Zoo, to talk about using an acoustic lure to catch northern Myotis. Okay, Toby, where'd Toby go? Oh, there he is. You want the podium or a walking one? All right.
Thank you. I just want to, really enjoyed hearing Eric's presentation. Love Eric, love Eric's work. It's a great data set. Just want to set the record straight. No one should ever do that. The data are really cool, but I've done some dumb things, and that's probably the worst. Okay, so a short and sweet one that I have, but hopefully of interest. So let's. A quick bit of audience participation. Does anyone recognize this species? Anyone want to guess? No volunteers. You're all wise to me. Sorry?
One in the title?
Northern Myotis. No, I tricked you. So this is Bechstein's Myotis. It's from Europe, where we name all the animals after dead old men. And it's here for two reasons. One, I enjoy it because before I moved to Canada, one of my more significant projects was a project studying Bechstein's Myotis. And it's a long-eared, slow-flying, gleaning Myotis. And then I came here and I've done projects with northern Myotis, which is a long-eared, slow-flying, gleaning Myotis. And I enjoy that symmetry in my life. It's also here because this is a species that first connected me with acoustic lures. It's very rare, it's very hard to find. Before acoustic lures came on the scene, there were 2 or 3 maternity colonies known in the UK. And then this chap, who is called Dr. David Hill, and a colleague called Frank Greenaway, of whom I could find no picture, invented a device called the Autobat, which is an acoustic lure playing back synthesized bat calls. And this proved very effective at catching Bechstein's bats. And so what do acoustic lures look like? Well, we're playing back calls from bats to attract bats. And we typically on this focus on social calls. Anyone that's done a lot of bat netting knows that distress calls from bats often attract other bats, but we typically don't want to do that deliberately because that's probably additional stress to them. There's some debate over synthesized versus direct call playback. So you can buy lures that are just playing back a recording. The device that David and Frank made plays back a synthesized version. I think there's sort of a lack of sort of a true comparison to definitively prove which is best, but they think the synthesized version is best. And when it comes to bats responding to the lure, it seems like some species work better than others, so this is a tool that sort of varies in its effectiveness. But it's also not the case that bats respond to their own calls. They often respond to the calls of other species, so there's something more complicated going on in terms of how they're attracted to it. So probably also some behavioral quirks in how that works. One of the theories around acoustic lures is that it's more effective at attracting bats that are foraging, when they're perhaps a little bit more territorial and they want to know who this stranger in their territory is, compared to, say, a bat that is commuting and might not care as much. And they're probably quite high impact, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But for all these sort of issues, in the right circumstance with the right species, they can be very effective. So with Bechstein's bat, we went from, I think, 2 or 3 maternity colonies now to about 50 known sites in the UK, greatly expanded the range, including in my home county of Buckinghamshire, where no one really expected them to be. And we found them up there, and it was so exciting that the local brewery made a special beer to celebrate. But so bringing that to North America, sort of got interested in applying this to Myotis septentrionalis, and that's sort of relevant because these are bats that are hard to survey. They're quiet echolocators, so they're not acoustic surveying isn't a super effective method for them. They're in small numbers, so even when there is a maternity colony, there aren't that many bats. They're hard to catch. And they're endangered. So can we translate this method of using an acoustic lure to increase our capture success of these bats? It's the question we asked. So do the bats plus the magic sound get more bats in our net? So we tested this using the Sussex Autobat. This is the device that David and Frank invented. It plays back the device we have playing back European social calls. The reason we use European social calls is because that was what was available, but also from testing around the world, this works with quite a range of Myotis and other species of bats, so it was reasonable to try it here. At some point, we want to work with David to get some North American bat species on here, but it's sort of working quite effectively as it is, so it wasn't an urgent piece to do that. it's playing back synthesized calls. So I don't know exactly how he does it, but they record the bats, they convert that into a lot of numbers in a spreadsheet, load the spreadsheet into the device, and that plays back a synthesized sound. And we're broadcasting in 4 directions. There's 4 speakers sending it off. Early versions of this had a metal vein in the middle of 2 transducers, which span and randomly reflected the sound in different directions. But since then, they figured out that just having 4 speakers works as well, if not better. We tested this. Well, to test this, we needed to go somewhere where we knew the bats were already there so that we knew if it worked or not. So we tested it in Rouge Park, where we've previously worked with Northern Myotis. The map here is some previous work. The yellow dots are acoustic monitoring locations. The red mist is acoustic activity. So you can see that the activity is spread throughout the forest here. And this is where we did our testing. We did 13 trials and the field work for this. And the sort of project was led by Maddie Foote, who's a former member of our team at the zoo. With each trial, we ran 2 6-meter single high mist nets, and we put them in places where we didn't think they would catch bats because we really wanted to isolate the effect to the lure calling the bats in rather than just sort of catching them by chance. And we rotated the 4 stimuli that we were testing plus a period of silence so that we could see sort of which conditions the bats were caught under and what the effects were. And we kept the nets at least 200 meters apart. We kept them 50 meters away from any roosts that we knew, and we didn't go back to any locations. Well, if we did this on consecutive nights, we moved at least 1,000 meters to try and reduce the impact in any specific area. So did it work? Yes. Questions? No, there's a little bit more. This is cherry picking, and it didn't work quite as cleanly as that. So in 13 trials, we got 10 captures. Half of them were the species we were looking for, also some big browns and 1 little brown, which is quite fun because we don't catch many little browns here. None of those were caught without the lure, which is great. And in terms of our 4 stimuli, we varied between about 2.5 and 4 hours of trapping per bat. I wish the numbers were a little bit more compelling, but it does sort of show the impact here. And if we focus that on Northern Myotis, we're at about sort of 4 to 8 hours, sort of indicating the 2nd and 3rd stimuli were more effective. So how does this work in terms of application? That's 4 Northern Myotis in 1 net, but again, it's cherry picking because that's the only time that's happened. So it works. We're pretty convinced that it increases capture success. And this is valuable to increase the effectiveness of our surveys. We have a limited window, and it costs a lot of resources to go do these surveys. We have a limited time window in the summer in which to do them. And so the more that we can do to increase the number of bats we catch in that time, the better. Seems valuable to target specific species. It's not a way of calling all of the bats out of the sky. It's another tool in the kit to try and sort of get us the edge in terms of picking up more bats. We do think it combines effectively with other survey methods. So since doing these 13 trials, we've tended just to stick this up alongside a triple high mist net. We didn't use triple highs in the first place because we know that they catch more bats than a single high, and we were trying to isolate that effect. But it sort of we've tested that less formally, but anecdotally, running this in a triple high seems to increase our capture success, again, as the picture shows. And we haven't tested it sort of formally targeting other species, but we do seem to, again, anecdotally see an increase in particularly some of the larger, higher flying bats, which are harder to catch, turning up in our nets. This particular red bat we caught a couple of years ago in a single high 6-meter net in dense forest. And maybe I'm wrong, but I wouldn't have thought that would be the place to try and catch one. But we caught this bat in there. Similarly, up in northern Ontario, we've been having a lot of success catching silver-haired bats and seeing them fly around the lure, fly into the net next to the lure, which sort of suggests that they are responding to that. Some cautions, though. So we really, I don't think anyone fully understands the impact of a lure. It's creating impact that goes beyond the bats that we catch. We're putting this sound, this stimuli into the environment, and we don't really know what that's doing to all of the bats in the area, and those impacts are not and probably will never be visible to us, so we are quite cautious in how we use it. We limit the number of time in one evening, the number of times that we go to a site and do this, and sort of how we move it around in that way. We try and avoid doing it near roosts, but we don't always know where the roosts are, so that's kind of problematic. There are behavioral limits to this effectiveness. I mentioned at the start that we think this is more effective when bats are foraging, and the problem there is there might only be one bat foraging in the area that we have the lure. So once we've caught that bat, we may not catch another in that location. Overall, the conclusion is it works, but it's not a magic bullet. And I think a lot of people try lures, and they don't get the right combination of things, and they get a little bit disappointed by it, and it goes back on the shelf. It can work really well in the right situation, but it's a tool, and it's not magic. So with that, I will thank Dr. David Hill, Maddie Foote, our field crew who helped collect the data for this, and our funders. So thank you.
Okay, I think we're still well ahead of time, which is great. So that means we have lots of time for questions for Toby. All right, who's got the first one? Great, Lauren. Of course.
Hey, Toby, that's super interesting. Thanks for the talk. I may have missed this. How far is the lure broadcast, like the distance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's the same answer as how far away can a bat detector detect a bat. It varies on the environment. It has a volume control. I think we're sort of talking tens of meters for the impact of this. So I said that in the testing we put it in places where you wouldn't normally put a mist net and wouldn't expect to catch a bat. It actually seems to work better in those cluttered environments, and it's really hard to persuade people to go put nets in the middle of the densest part of the forest you can find, and that probably limits the range, but it still works.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Other end of the room. Come here. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, hi Toby, thanks for the great talk. So just curious, what was the UK able to do with that data from the Myotis species on the broader scale? I know the UK has, and Europe has way better or different legislation when it comes to, say, bats in buildings, for example. But so I'm just wondering, on a broader scale, what can this research do for Canada, and what did it do for the UK? Thank you.
I'm going to go with the UK having different legislation, not necessarily great, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, so I think where this helps is in terms of increasing our survey success, and therefore the sort of ability with which we can establish ranges for these species. So the impact of this for Bechstein's myotis was that we went from, let's say, 2 or 3 known colonies in one county to actually significantly expanding the range that we thought it was in. As I say, we weren't even going to do it in Buckinghamshire, which is where I'm from, because no one thought it was there, and then it was, and so we've significantly expanded the range in that direction. And so I think where we have some of the species in Canada that are difficult to survey, like northern myotis, it gives us a chance of better filling in the map, and those data of just knowing where the bats are is one of the steps in terms of filling in some of our knowledge gaps. I think the potential for increasing success catching some of the larger migratory bats, which we don't see in the nets very often, could be quite cool as we sort of see those species getting more attention and more questions being asked around them.
Pivot, Toby, we're over here now. Okay.
Thanks, Toby. That was great. My question was just, with the bats that you did catch with the lure, do you find that you were catching any recaps from the same study, or like ones you'd recapped the night before or the last time you used the lure? Just curious if there's individual recaps that are maybe like an individual pattern. Certain individuals are maybe more attracted to the lure than others. I know you said there's like a behavioral time frame there, but maybe just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Thank you. So the short answer, I mean, we didn't catch enough bats, I think, to really dig into that pattern. There were certainly some adults, some juveniles, some males, some females, but no kind of clear breakdown like that. In terms of recaptures, that one's easier in that there weren't any. The northern, I said that northern myotis have small populations. This one seems to be infinite because we almost never recapture them unless our bands are falling off. And so, yeah, no, especially with I guess we didn't ban the big brown, so I can't say 100% sure there, but the Myotis species, there were no recaptures.
Is there another question here? Great.
Thank you for the great presentation. I may have missed it, but I was wondering how frequent were you using the call, or was it on a continuous loop, or was it in intervals?
Yeah, I didn't. Sorry, I didn't break that down super clearly. So we had 4 stimuli and silence, and we altered the order of that to account for a time of night, and we just played the calls for 20 minutes straight, and then either switched to a new one or switched it off. In other work that Dave and Frank have done, silence actually seems to help. So alternating stimuli and silence is a good way to go. With the Bechstein's project in the UK, to standardize the survey methodology, actually the way that worked was a 15-minute track, which was mostly Bechstein's calls with intermittent silence, and then 2 minutes of just all the species just to try and pull anything else in. And then there's sort of that 15-minute track playing on a loop, so kind of incorporating those different pieces.
Thanks, Toby. I have 2 questions. I'm going to sneak 2 in. I might have missed it too. Was this in, I'm not sure if it was in your presentation or not, but what time of year were you doing the capture at?
Yeah, in the summer, so maternity. Some were pre, some were post-maternity.
Okay. And then a quick comment before my second question. For northern Myotis in the net at the same time, at that time of year and that type of location makes me like want to cry of jealousy. Okay. Second question, you kind of touched on it already in terms of, do you have any idea of the size of this population?
Yeah, and I'll say again, so the 4, that was a one-off. It's great to put the picture up, but it doesn't normally happen. Size of the population, I don't know, I think it's infinite. They're not endangered at all. No, that's going to get taken out of context. No, we must be getting close to the limit, but it's really interesting that we're not recapturing them. And I don't know.
No idea of numbers.
I mean, there's at least 30 or 40.
Hi. Great presentation. For the bats you were capturing in the UK, what were the recapture rates like there? Like, did you see any sort of, I guess, hesitancy of the bats where, like, once they were caught, once they sort of wisened to it and weren't caught again?
That's a really great question. I'm getting more questions than I talked for. I don't know if that's fair. Yeah, and it's a difficult one because I have to remember something, sort of 12, 13 years ago. So in the Bechstein's project that the BCD Bat Conservation Trust did that we participated in, we didn't do much repetition of sites. So it was trying to do the best forest in every 10-kilometer grid square in the county, which I think was 200 in total across the country. So in that case, there's not much revisiting. The colonies, the population that we found in Buckinghamshire, we then actually did a follow-on project going back and catching those more. And I'm pretty sure that we had recaptures in that, but I honestly, I would have to go back and check in with my colleagues and be reminded of that, because my memory is not as great. So, yeah.
Anyone else want to dive deep into Toby's memory? Okay, there we go.
You don't know what you'll find.
I've also got 2 questions. Number 1, was the beer any good?
Well, so I got given a 20-liter box of this beer, which sounds great, but it was one volume. It was so once you opened it, you had to drink it all. And that was quite challenging. So it was good at the start, but maybe not by the end.
Is that why there were 4 bats in the net?
Fair enough. Second question, for the synthesized call, I'm just wondering if an automated recording unit or something's been set up similar. I'm just curious if the synthesized call can be separated from a natural call, and while recording, if that data can be separated somehow.
So I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
For the lure, if it's making it not the natural, the synthesized call, and we're setting up something like just an acoustic recording unit, just to try to catch species and everything else. I'm just wondering if that synthesized call is caught on the AR in the unit, or if we can separate it.
Right.
And if it's European, I assume the translation will be helpful.
Yeah, potentially. So you're asking if we were kind of recording this, could we detect if real bats were flying around and responding to it?
Rather than instead of using a mist net, yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. And we tried that in 2020 when we weren't catching any bats because of COVID. So we put up, because we just spent a lot of money on these lures, so we wanted to test them. And so we put them up with a bat detector next to them and infrared video camera on one of them. Yeah, it was actually really hard to distinguish the bat calls from the lure, even though we tried to put the microphone far enough away that wouldn't happen. So we didn't really get anything conclusive out of doing that. It was actually pretty conclusive with the infrared video camera. If I'd sort of thought more about it, I would have included some infrared video footage of a northern Myotis flying around the transducers, which is also a kind of pretty compelling suggestion that this works. But I didn't think to do that before I submitted my presentation on Tuesday. So.
Fair enough.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. So I have one question for you, Toby, that I'll remind myself that bats are not birds. Usually in a room like this, people cheer after that. But that said, something like this is obviously done a lot for birds, particularly for owls is what comes to mind to me. And there used to be a protocol where you would play owl calls from the smallest size owl up to the biggest size owl. So do you think there's any potential in mixing different species of bats within your lure in the future?
Yeah, I think it's pretty worthwhile. So with this, we were really trying to narrow in and sort of prove that there was an effect. So hence doing it that way with the experimental design. But it's a lot more fun in practice just to go out and blast loads of stuff and see what bats turn up in your net. And so there's a few tracks on the lure that are mixes of different calls. And so those are probably good ways to go if you're just trying to maximize captures.
Thank you, Toby.